My name is Elena Rivers, and I'm 23 years old. If you'd met me on my first day at Meridian Tech, you would have thought I'd already won at life. Fresh out of college, badge still stiff on its lanyard, I walked into that glass building, feeling like every late night, an exam, an anxious breakdown had finally paid off. Good salary, real benefits, cutting-edge software development. It wasn't just a job. It felt like the beginning of the person I was supposed to become. My manager, Corbin, met me in the lobby with a wide, easy smile and a branded coffee mug already waiting for me on my desk. "You're going to love it here," he said during my first week, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "We're like family." I remember smiling back, feeling this warm rush of belonging. I didn't know that sentence should have been my first red flag. For exactly 3 weeks, everything was perfect. I picked up the code base faster than anyone expected. My first feature shipped ahead of schedule. People complimented my documentation in stand-up. I stayed late because I wanted to, not because I had to. When I walked through the open office, the huge windows spilling city light across rows of monitors, I felt proud. Then Damien transferred to our department. He walked in on a Monday, tall and self-assured, balancing a coffee in one hand and a laptop bag in the other, like he'd done this 100 times before. His smile was the kind that disarmed people instantly, warm, charming, practiced. "Team, this is Damien," Corbin announced. 5 years of experience, stellar track record. You're going to love working with him." Within days, Damien was Corbin's golden boy. In meetings, Corbin would say things like, "Let's run this by Damien," or, "If Damien signs off, we're good." I told myself it didn't mean anything. He had more experience. Of course they trusted him. The sabotage started so small, I almost convinced myself I was crazy. I'd push a clean build before going home, test green across the board. The next morning, my code would be full of mysterious bugs. Conditionals changed, variables renamed inconsistently, functions acting like they'd been rewritten by someone who didn't care if anything worked. I'd open shared project folders to attach files, only to find my work missing, like entire days had been erased from the server. During team meetings, when I finally worked up the courage to present ideas, Damien would interrupt with a concerned little frown. I think what she's trying to say is he'd begin, then re-explain my concept, polishing it, tightening it, framing it like it had sprung fully formed from his mind. Corbin would nod approvingly. "Great insight, Damien." I laughed it off at first. New girl paranoia, I told myself while reheating leftovers at midnight. "You're overthinking it. He's just confident, helpful." But the glitches got bolder. My project presentations, slides I'd tested the night before, would suddenly show broken images, misaligned text, graphs missing entire data sets. I'd stand there in front of the team, cheeks burning, while Damien leaned forward in his chair. "Technical difficulties happen," he'd say, rising with that perfect heroic air. "Let me help you out." He'd fix everything effortlessly in front of everyone, restoring files I hadn't even known how to access from that terminal, clicking through flows with the ease of someone who'd already rehearsed the entire scene. He looked like a savior. I looked like I didn't know how to use my own tools. One morning, I arrived to find my computer already awake, a faint glow on the monitor in the dim office. When I logged in, every current project file was corrupted. Not gone. Worse. Damaged, unreadable, mocking. I checked the system logs with trembling fingers. Remote access, 3:00 a.m. My stomach dropped. I took it to Corbin. He skimmed the screen for half a second before shrugging. "You really need to back up your work more carefully," he said. "Damien never has these issues." The way he glanced across the room at his golden boy told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a system failure. It was me, being slowly rewritten into the problem. That was the moment something inside me shifted. I stopped assuming the universe was chaotic and started assuming someone was pulling the strings. I began staying late, long after the office emptied, the hum of the HVAC and the glow of my monitor the only witnesses. I installed monitoring software on my machine. I turned on keystroke logging. I started taking screenshots of file trees and change histories before I left each night. The data told a story I hadn't wanted to believe. Remote access sessions that didn't belong to me. Deleted emails that should have cleared my name. System logs showing activity at hours when I was asleep miles away. The pattern was too clean, too targeted. So I did what you're supposed to do. I took everything to HR. Victoria, the HR director, sat across from me in her neatly organized office, fingers steepled as she listened. I laid it all out. The logs, the timestamps, the missing files, the way Damien swooped in to save me in public after quietly sabotaging me in private. "This is serious," she said, flipping through the printed pages. "We'll investigate immediately." For the first time in weeks, I went back to my desk with my shoulders a little lighter. Someone in authority had said the words I needed to hear. 2 days later, Damien cornered me in the break room. "Heard you've been spreading some interesting stories about me," he said lightly, stirring sugar into his coffee. His voice was calm, but his eyes were cold. "That's not very team player behavior, Elena." The following week, I was written up for missing deadlines. Deadlines no one had ever given me in writing. Victoria called me back into her office, but this time her tone was clinical, distant. "We've had some concerns raised about your transition into the role," she said. "Disruptive workplace behavior, unfounded accusations against colleagues. Sometimes new employees struggle with the adjustment. Perhaps you'd benefit from our employee assistance program." I stared at her, the words blurring. Unfounded accusations, new employee struggles, employee assistance program. Damien hadn't just gotten to my files, he'd gotten to her. That evening, as I was packing up in a daze, my desk neighbor, Tessa, brushed past my chair and whispered, "Be careful." I turned. "What?" She glanced around, making sure no one was listening. "Damien's done this before." My throat went dry. "To who?" "The last guy who tried to report him," she said. "He ended up fired for cause. No severance, no unemployment, nothing." My blood ran cold. "How many people has he done this to?" Tessa's eyes flicked away. "3 that I know of. He targets anyone who might threaten his position, makes them look incompetent, then swoops in to save the day." That night, I didn't just cry in the shower and call my mom and ask if I should quit. I opened my laptop and typed his name into a search bar. Damien Hale. 3 previous companies in 5 years. Each time, he left right after someone else was terminated. The pattern was there, hiding in plain sight. I stared at the screen, the glow casting strange shadows on my walls, feeling something sharper than fear settle in my chest. This wasn't random. This wasn't bad luck. This was a predator who had learned exactly how far he could go in a system that refused to see him. And if he was going to play this like a game, then I needed to stop pretending we were like family and start playing to win. The quarterly review presentation was coming up, my one real chance to prove my worth, or to be humiliated beyond repair. I opened a blank document and began to plan, not just a presentation, but a trap. The morning of the quarterly review, I woke up before my alarm. For a moment, staring at the cracks in my ceiling, I let myself imagine a version of the day where everything went right, where I stood in front of the executive team, delivered the best work of my short career, and they saw me, really saw me, for what I was capable of. Then my brain, ever helpful, reminded me that there was also Damien. My apartment was quiet except for the sound of my kettle. While my coffee brewed, I opened my laptop one more time, not because I needed to, but because I didn't trust anyone anymore. Not the network, not the building, not even my own luck. The slides were perfect, animations smooth, graphs aligned, appendices organized. Just like they'd been the night before, just like they would not be if someone decided to help. I'd learned my lesson. Over the past few weeks, I'd split my work into layers. The pretty high-level slides, the ones you'd use to impress leadership, lived in one file. The real heart of the project, the detailed statistical modeling, the regression outputs, the correlation matrices, the messy prototypes and data trails, lived in another. Damien had only ever had access to one of those layers. By the time I walked into the conference room, laptop under my arm, I looked calm. Inside, my nerves buzzed like a live wire. The room smelled faintly of coffee and dry erase markers. Executives from across the floor filed in with their notepads and tablets. Corbin sat near the front, next to a woman in a navy blazer I recognized from internal newsletters, one of the senior VPs. Damien took a seat where he could see both me and the screen, a polite little smile on his face like this was just another show. "Whenever you're ready, Elena," Corbin said. I plugged in, took a breath, and began. For the first 10 minutes, it was everything I'd hoped it would be. My voice was steady as I walked them through the problem we were trying to solve, declining customer retention in specific product lines. I showed them how I'd dissected engagement metrics, segmented users, and built hypotheses around behavior patterns. The charts on the screen matched the ones in my brain. Every click landed where I'd rehearsed. Corbin nodded. The VP leaned forward. A few people even took notes. Halfway through my deck, Just as I transitioned to the projected impact of a new engagement model, the screen went black. Not a freeze, not a glitchy flicker, just dark. The Meridian logo flashed for half a second, then nothing. A murmur rolled through the room. I felt my throat close up. No, 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 I whispered, fingers flying across the keyboard, checking cables, hitting escape, alt-tabbing, anything. Behind me, I heard a chair slide back. Looks like we're having some technical difficulties, Damien announced, standing up with that familiar concerned expression. Don't worry, I have a backup copy of the presentation ready, just in case. Of course he did. He moved smoothly past me, fingers already poised over his own keyboard at the opposite end of the table. Within seconds, the screen flickered back to life, this time with a version of my slides. Same color scheme, same title, same structure, different name. Proposed Engagement Optimization Strategy, the title read, presented by Damien Hale. I stood there, frozen, watching months of work parade across the screen as if I'd never existed. This is exactly the kind of innovation we need, the woman in the navy blazer said after he ran through the summary. Damien, how soon could you roll this out? Blood roared in my ears. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I can have the first phase in place by the end of the month, Damien said smoothly. We've already laid most of the groundwork. Something inside me snapped. I thought of the corrupted files, the late-night remote access logs, Tessa's whisper about past victims who'd walked out with boxes instead of promotions. I thought of Victoria's clinical tone when she told me I was making unfounded accusations. I thought of how many people like him got away with this because people like me backed down. I raised my hand. Actually, I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded, I'd like to add something to this presentation. Damien's confident expression flickered at the edges. I think we've covered everything, Elena. This is fascinating work, I said, cutting him off, but keeping my tone light. I turned to the VP. Damien, could you walk us through the specific methodology you used for the market analysis on slide 14? He blinked. There was no slide 14 in his version, not with the methodology, anyway. Well, the methodology was fairly standard, he said, adjusting his collar. You know, typical analysis. Really? I tilted my head, because I found the regression modeling particularly innovative. How did you handle seasonal variance in the dataset? His eyes darted to his laptop. He clicked aimlessly for a second too long. There were comprehensive adjustments, he said. Nothing unusual. I smiled. I had seen that smile before, on his face, when he'd swooped in to rescue me from disasters he'd engineered. Could you pull up the correlation matrices you used? I asked. I'd love for the team to see your approach to the multivariate analysis. Corbin frowned. What matrices? Damien's already pale face lost more color. I think we should move on to implementation planning, he said quickly. The details might be too technical for... No, the VP interrupted, eyes sharp now. This is the heart of the work. I'd like to understand the methodology. Perfect. I'm so glad you said that, I replied. Before anyone could stop me, I unplugged Damien's laptop from the projector and connected mine. My hands shook for half a second, then steadied. I'm sorry for the confusion, I said. It looks like there was a technical error earlier. Let me pull up the complete presentation, appendices, models, and all. When my full deck appeared on the screen, the difference was immediate. Damien's version had been a skeleton, high-level points, pretty slides, broad strokes. Mine had a spine, detailed charts, side-by-side comparisons, code snippets, data flow diagrams, multiple versions labeled by date, a full appendix of statistical outputs, including the correlation matrices I just asked him about. As you can see, I said, clicking to a slide filled with scatter plots and trend lines, the relationship between customer engagement and retention wasn't obvious at first. We had to build a multivariate model and test several hypotheses before we arrived at a reliable predictive pattern. I walked them through the regression analysis, explaining how I'd accounted for seasonal variance and outliers. I showed them the engagement scoring framework I'd designed and the projected impact on retention metrics. Questions flew at me from every direction. Technical questions, practical questions, financial questions. I answered each one clearly, precisely, the way you can only answer if you've lived inside the problem for months. Damien sat in silence. At one point, I continued, we hit a problem with heteroscedasticity in the regression residuals. The model was unstable. I paused. Damien, I said, turning to him with a pleasant smile, since this is your research, would you like to explain how you address that? The word hung in the air like a stone dropped in water. He started, then faltered. It was handled through standard protocols. Standard protocols? I repeated gently. Did you use weighted least squares? Transform the variables? The team should understand your choice if they're going to implement this. The room had gone very, very quiet. Corbin's gaze shifted between us. The VP folded her hands, watching Damien closely. One of the senior developers in the back was trying, and failing, not to smirk. Perhaps we can schedule a follow-up session for the technical details, Damien said weakly. I think we're seeing the technical details now, the VP said, not taking her eyes off the screen. Elena, please continue. This level of analysis is exactly what we've been missing. So I did. For the next hour, I presented everything Damien hadn't been able to steal. The evolution of the model, the failed attempts, the iterations, the reasoning behind each decision. I showed them the early prototypes and the logs of when each version had been created. The timestamps told their own story. By the time I finished, the executives were no longer wondering who had done the work. They were wondering how they'd almost missed it. When the meeting ended, people filed out in clusters, some stopping to shake my hand, others already discussing implementation timelines. Damien lingered by the door, waiting until the room was nearly empty. That little stunt of yours, he said, jaw tight, was a bad idea. I closed my laptop with deliberate slowness and stood up, meeting his eyes. You're right, I said. I should have done it sooner. He scoffed, but there was a tremor in it. You can't prove anything. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened a video. On the screen, a familiar figure sat at a desk, my desk, at 3:08 a.m., navigating through my folders, copying files, modifying my presentation, then corrupting it. The timestamp glowed in the corner. Funny, I said lightly, because the monitoring software you recommended works both ways. His face drained of color. I swiped to another file, a screen recording of him fixing my corrupted slides in the office, immediately after the version where he'd broken them. Another showing him in my inbox at 2 a.m, deleting the email thread where Corbin had assigned me those missed deadlines. I've got 6 months of this, I said quietly. Remote access logs, file histories, you sabotaging me, you stealing my work, all date-stamped, all backed up off-site. He swallowed. You don't understand. And that's just here, I continued, cutting him off. I've also spoken to Garrett from TechFlow Solutions, and Wesley, and Priya. His eyes widened at the names. Turns out, I said, I'm not your first target, and they've all been keeping their own records too. Emails, versions, presentations that look a little too familiar. He stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. What do you want? He whispered. Nothing, I said. I already got what I wanted in there. I nodded toward the conference room, where the executives had just seen him fall apart. But you should know, I added softly. I've scheduled a meeting with Victoria tomorrow morning. I'm bringing everything. Mine, Garrett's, Wesley's, Priya's, all of it. You're bluffing, he said, but his voice was thin. Am I? I tilted my head. Because when HR realizes this isn't just new employee struggles, but a pattern of harassment and theft across multiple companies, it's not going to be a write-up this time. For a moment, we just stood there in the empty hallway, the hum of the building all around us. He had spent years perfecting his game. He thought I would play by his rules forever. What he didn't understand was that I had stopped trying to win his game. I was about to change the whole board. Victoria's office looked different the next morning. Not physically. Same framed certificates on the wall, same tastefully neutral rug, same faint lavender scent. But the energy had shifted. Yesterday, when she'd summoned me for a behavioral warning, she'd spoken to me like I was fragile, delusional, someone to be corrected. Today, she stood when I entered. Elena, she said, please come in. I walked in with my laptop bag hanging from one shoulder and a small stack of printed documents in my hand. But I didn't come alone. Tessa walked in behind me, chin lifted even though her hands trembled slightly. Behind her were Mark from Back-End Development and Elise from QA. Two people who had quietly watched Damien's behavior for months, but had been too afraid to say anything until now. Victoria's eyes flicked between them before landing on me. I understand you have new information, she said. Yes, I replied simply. I placed the stack of printouts on her desk. System access logs, time-stamped keystroke recordings, screenshots of corrupted files, version histories showing Damien overwriting my work, remote access records proving he'd been inside my machine at hours when I wasn't even awake, let alone logged in. Victoria skimmed the first few pages and froze. This is extensive. There's more, I said. I opened my laptop and played the videos. Damien entering my folders at 3:08 a.m. Damien deleting my emails. Damien sabotaging presentations before fixing them in front of the team. Then the call recordings from the previous victims, Garrett, Wesley, Priya, each explaining how Damien had ruined their reputations and careers in almost identical ways, their timelines lined up like neatly stacked dominoes. Tessa stepped forward. "I've seen him do similar things," she said quietly. "Not everything, but enough to know Elena's not imagining it." Elise nodded. "He accessed the QA server twice. I checked the logs." Mark crossed his arms. "He mounted my drive remotely once too. I thought it was a mistake." Victoria listened, slowly sinking into her chair. Her expression shifted from confusion to horror to the kind of cold, controlled anger HR directors usually reserve for lawsuits that should have been preventable. "We'll launch a full investigation immediately," she said. But something in her tone told me the investigation had already begun the moment she saw the first log entry. What followed happened fast. Faster than I expected. Faster than Damien could possibly have prepared for. By noon, corporate security had been brought in. By 1 p.m., I had begun quietly copying Damien's entire system. By the following morning, an external cybersecurity firm arrived. The real bombshell hit on day 2. Victoria asked me to come to a meeting in the executive conference room, the same room where Damien had tried to steal my career. The air felt heavier this time, the kind of heaviness that precedes something irreversible. "Elena," Victoria said as I sat down, "there's something you need to hear." She clicked a button on the remote. The investigator's voice came through the speakerphone. Calm, professional, clinical. "We've completed the preliminary forensic review of Damien Hale's system," he said, "and what we've found is substantial." I braced myself. This goes far beyond internal sabotage. We've uncovered extensive evidence that Damien has been collecting, copying, and exporting proprietary company information, not just recently, since his first week here. Flashes of memory hit me. Damien arriving with a smile. Damien offering help that I never asked for. Damien suggesting shortcuts that seemed convenient at the time. The investigator continued. "We also recovered encrypted archives containing client lists, upcoming product features, pricing strategies, algorithm documentation, and communications with external entities. Based on the volume and specificity of the files, we believe he's been selling Meridian's confidential data to competitors." My heart rattled in my chest. Industrial espionage. Not sabotage, not pettiness, a crime. A federal crime. And I had been the perfect cover. Young, inexperienced, vulnerable, easy to discredit, easy to push out if I got too close to something he didn't want me to see. The investigator wasn't done. We cross-referenced the stolen files with public information from competitors who recently undercut Meridian. It appears some of their sudden strategic moves matched the data Damien exfiltrated. "How much damage?" the CEO asked quietly. "Preliminary estimate, $8 million. The room fell silent. A long, suffocating silence. Victoria finally spoke. "There's something else, Elena." She slid a printed sheet toward me. A timeline. Damien's employment history. And next to each job, a note. Employee terminated. Product delayed, client lost, competitor released similar product. Information leak suspected. Each entry mirrored the last. The pattern was unmistakable. He'd done this before, everywhere, for years. "And there's more," the investigator added. "2 of his previous employers have agreed to cooperate with us. They both suffered similar incidents. Talented employees pushed out, confidential information leaked, competitors making suspiciously timed moves." My breath caught. Garrett, Wesley, Priya. Their stories hadn't been coincidences. They had been warnings. Echoes of the same predator repeating the same pattern, leaving destruction behind him. "What happens now?" I asked. "We've already contacted federal authorities," the CEO said. "This is now a criminal matter." Damien's downfall wasn't dramatic. Not the way villains fall in movies, with yelling or furniture thrown or grand denials shouted into a room of gasping coworkers. His end came quietly, wrapped in confusion and disbelief. The next morning, his keycard stopped working. Security walked him out with a cardboard box filled with the polite fiction of a life. Desk plants, sticky notes, an empty mug, a novelty stress ball. 2 men in suits followed behind him. FBI agents. As he passed my desk, he paused just long enough to look at me. Really look. "You destroyed my life," he said, barely above a whisper. For a moment, I almost felt something. Pity? sadness, a ghost of empathy for the person he could have been. But then I remembered Garrett's voice breaking over a video call, Wesley admitting he'd nearly lost his marriage, Priya saying she'd stopped trusting her own instincts, me crying in my car outside the office, wondering if I was losing my mind. I met his eyes. "No," I said calmly. "I just stopped letting you destroy mine." He blinked, just once, as if the truth had finally hit him. Then he was gone. The criminal case moved quickly. Damien's lawyer tried. He really did. But with 4 companies' worth of evidence and 3 previous victims willing to testify, even the best defense couldn't bend reality far enough to save him. He accepted a plea deal. 5 years in prison, restitution exceeding $12 million, permanent ban from working in the tech industry. His assets were seized, his credentials revoked, his reputation scourged so thoroughly that not even a rebranded identity could salvage it. But the satisfaction didn't come from watching him fall. It came from the messages that followed. Garrett, I got a job offer today. First time in years, I feel like myself again. Wesley, thank you. I'm sober. My marriage is healing. I thought I was broken, but I wasn't. Priya, justice didn't erase what he did, but it closed the wound. Thank you for giving us that chance. Their recovery felt like sunlight breaking through a storm I'd been trapped in too long. And for the first time since Damien walked into my department with that charming, practiced smile, I felt safe again. Not because predators like him were gone, but because now I knew how to fight them. Damien's conviction should have felt like the end of the story. Curtains closed, villain escorted off stage in handcuffs, justice neatly served. But I learned something in the months that followed. When a predator falls, the ripple doesn't end at the splash. It spreads. And sometimes, if you're paying attention, those ripples show you exactly where you're needed next. 3 weeks after the sentencing, Corbin called me into his office. He looked different. Not arrogant, not dismissive, almost humbled. "Elena," he began, "I owe you a sincere apology." It wasn't dramatic. He didn't fall to his knees or recite a speech. But for a man who had once believed Damien could walk on water while I struggled to stay afloat, even that was startling. He cleared his throat, then continued. Your research, your real research, has been groundbreaking. Customer retention has risen nearly 23%. Leadership wants to promote you. I stared, stunned. Promote me? He smiled weakly. You've earned it, in ways none of us appreciated soon enough. A week later, I became senior analyst with a mandate that surprised me. Create a system to prevent another Damien. At first, it felt like a strange honor, like being asked to rebuild the house you barely escaped from while it was burning. But the more I thought about it, the more it felt right. After all, who better to build a shield than the person who once needed one? I started small. Anonymous reporting channels, secure logging tools, clear protocols for investigating complaints, mandatory training for all managers titled Recognizing Workplace Manipulation and Predatory Patterns. People rolled their eyes initially. Some thought it was overreacting, that Damien was an anomaly. But patterns aren't anomalies when they repeat. They're warnings. And I'd seen the warnings across 4 different companies. Within 3 months, the culture began to shift. Team leads asked more questions. Employees felt safer raising concerns. HR began to investigate complaints instead of dismissing them. And slowly, trust, real trust, returned. The conference room, where Damien tried to steal my work, got a new name, the Innovation Lab. A polished plaque hung by the door. Excellence cannot be faked, borrowed, or stolen. It must be earned. I walked past it every day, and every day it steadied something inside me. But the plaque wasn't what mattered. What mattered came 2 years later. A new hire named Kevin arrived. Charming, helpful, both too much and too quickly. He offered unsolicited help in meetings. Accidentally rewrote someone's code right before a demo. Repeated colleagues' ideas as if they were his own. Tried to insert himself into sensitive projects. 6 weeks in, we caught him remotely accessing a teammate's drive at 1:24 a.m. Another Damien, another pattern, another predator who assumed no one would notice. But this time we had systems, protocols, receipts. We documented everything. We interviewed the quietly uncomfortable coworkers. We cross-referenced logs, timestamps, and project histories. Kevin was terminated before he could ruin a single career. On the day he handed in his badge, Tessa stopped by my office. The system worked, she said softly. You built something that actually protects people. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe it. Soon after, invitations began arriving from outside companies. workplace culture conferences, tech ethics panels, corporate leadership summits. They all wanted the same thing: how to stop the next Damien. My story spread farther than I expected. People approached me after every talk. I thought I was crazy. I thought I was the only one. I didn't know how to prove what was happening. Your presentation gave me the tools I needed. I realized something. Stopping one predator wasn't enough. Stopping the pattern, that was the real victory. I was no longer just defending myself, I was teaching others to defend themselves too. The impact grew until one day, a publisher approached me. "We want your framework," they said, "your story, your strategies, a guide for anyone trapped in a hostile workplace." The book I never planned to write became a bestseller, Fighting Fire with Fire, a survivor's guide to workplace predators. It wasn't a memoir, it was a manual, a blueprint, a lifeline. Readers started connecting, forming local meetups, creating support forums, sharing documentation templates and red flag checklists, helping each other survive and win. My inbox filled with messages from people across the world. "Your book saved my job. Your system caught our predator early. Our company adopted your policies. I'm safe now." Each message felt like a small resurrection. 5 years after Damien's conviction, I made a decision. I left Meridian. Not because I was running, this time I was building. My consulting firm launched with a team of 12 specialists. 3 of them were names Damien once tried to erase. Garrett, Senior Architect Wesley, Data Strategy. Lead Priya, VP of Engineering Partnerships. We traveled from company to company, implementing reporting systems, training managers, and teaching employees how to recognize the early signs of manipulation. Over 200 companies hired us in our first few years. Our software tracked behavioral patterns, access anomalies, and power misuse red flags. And one afternoon, during a training session at a Fortune 500 company, a young woman approached me. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly. 6 months ago, I was ready to quit the tech industry. My heart tightened. Her voice held something familiar: fear, exhaustion, that bone-deep weariness of always feeling 2 steps from collapse. "But my manager had read your book," she continued. "They recognized what was happening. They protected me." She blinked rapidly, eyes shining. "I love my job again. I thought I'd never say that." Her words struck something deep in me, something hollow and bruised that had finally healed. I smiled and said, "You deserve to be protected." Next year, Damien gets out of prison. He'll return to an industry that no longer resembles the one he preyed on. An industry now filled with people who know his tactics, his patterns, his shadows. He'll find that the doors he once slipped through quietly are bolted shut, that the kind of victims he once targeted now know the signs, that companies track what he used to hide, that his methods, once invisible, now glow like warning lights on a dashboard. Predators adapt, but so do their targets. So does the world. Last month, Meridian added a second plaque outside the Innovation Lab. I saw it on a visit, polished to a mirror finish. It reads, "When the system fails to protect you, become the system that protects others." I stood there a long time, not because I admired the plaque, but because I finally believed it. The fire I fought with wasn't bitterness. It wasn't pettiness. It wasn't revenge. It was justice, scaled, sharpened, and shared. The kind of justice that doesn't just stop one predator. The kind that stops all of them.